Israel has recently admitted to arming and funding a Palestinian militia that is operating in southern Gaza. Who is the abu-Shabab militia? Are they affiliated with ISIS? What are their goals, and whose side are they on? I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Monday, May 26th, local Palestinians began reporting that a new militia is operating publicly in southern Gaza. Under the leadership of Yasser abu-Shabab, the members of this militia were seen operating in the IDF control areas of Rafah. This is the most southern city in the Gaza Strip. By May 28th, pictures began to emerge of group members wearing military fatigues and armed with quote-unquote regulation weaponry as they worked securing aid trucks that were unloading in the areas of Rafah. The story quickly gained traction, and between May 30th and June 1st of this year, Hamas announced that it has begun operating against Palestinians who are collaborating with Israel in Rafah. Later reports in the Saudi Al-Hadith also stated that Hamas is encouraging the Palestinian population to try to combat this new militia. On June 5th, the story exploded in Israel when Avigdor Lieberman, who's a member of the opposition parties in Israel's parliament, bypassed Israel's military censorship and stated that Israel is arming ISIS-affiliated militias in Gaza. This broke the censorship cloud that had been in the country thus far, and by evening Israel had fully admitted to funding and arming the Palestinian militia in Rafah, with security forces stating that the guns that were supplied to the members of the militia are guns that the IDF had confiscated from Hamas and from Hezbollah during the war. So who is this Palestinian militia? Where did it originate from? And what are its aims? I'm going to start from saying that we don't know every step of the way of the history of this militia. What I am reporting is what we know thus far, and where there are gaps in the history, I will point them out. The leader of the militia, Yasser abu-Shabab, is a 32-year-old Palestinian who was born in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Prior to the war breaking out, he became famous both in drug trafficking and smuggling activities from Egypt and from Israel into the Gaza Strip, and he was in fact arrested and imprisoned by Hamas on the charges of drug trafficking and of theft. Now, there are conflicting reports about how he got out of Hamas's jails. One report says that Hamas released him from prison when the war began. Other reports said that he escaped from prison when the IDF bombed out the Hamas headquarters in the areas that he was held. Regardless of what happened, what we do know is that by May of 2024, he was no longer in jail, he was free, and he was in the areas of Rafah. It is also important to note that May of 2024 is exactly when the IDF began its first invasion of the southern town of Rafah. After that time, when abu-Shabab was no longer in jail, he amassed a following of roughly 100 members and established a group that was called Al-Qawat al-Shabiyya, or in English, the Popular Forces. The group began spreading its influence in Rafah, and it really took advantage of the fact that during that time, the IDF was combating Hamas's activity in the city, so while Hamas was weakening as it was fighting the IDF, the Popular Forces were gaining ground. At that time, the group was engaged primarily in smuggling goods and looting humanitarian aid. It's important to remember that a lot of the humanitarian aid that goes into the Gaza Strip goes through the town of Rafah. The group effectively used the chaos in order to set up a black market network within the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. These activities put the group on a collision course with Hamas, who was also working very hard to control the markets and to take over the humanitarian aid at that time. So as this group was gaining grounds in the southern areas of the Gaza Strip, Hamas started to pay attention to them as well. The Popular Forces' largest operation, which to some extent put them on the map, happened on November 16th of 2024, when the group's armed members raided a convoy of 109 UN aid trucks that were traveling through Rafah, completely looting 98 of them. Abu-Shabab himself presented this operation as an act of service to the Palestinian population, stating that his group was taking over the aid in order to ensure that it gets to the population safely, rather than being looted by Hamas and diverted for its purposes. Several days after that operation, however, Hamas attempted to assassinate the group's leadership, as, like I said, that really put the group on the map. Hamas carried out an attack on the European hospital in Khan Yunis, where there was a meeting of the group leadership. Yasser abu-Shabab himself survived that attack and managed to escape. However, 20 of his associates, including his brother, Fathi abu-Shabab, and a senior leader in the organization, Majid Abu Dakar, were killed. The incident in November gave abu-Shabab's militia much more notoriety, and its influence in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip began to grow even further over the next 6 months. According to some reports, it amassed over 300 members. Now, this is where we don't exactly know what happened between November of 2024 and May of 2025. We do know that during those 6 months, the group really grew in strength, but we don't know exactly what deals were made. What we do know is that at some point during this time, a deal was made between Israel and the Popular Forces, and the IDF moved from turning a blind eye to the group's activity that it was carrying out in southern Gaza to officially arming and funding the organization. Israeli security officials who were interviewed after the story broke over the last week stated that the weaponry that was given to the militia had previously been in the hands of either Hamas or Hezbollah. In addition to that, sources who were interviewed by Al-Ahbar stated that the group members were receiving some 3,000 new Israeli shekels a month from Israel as part of their activities in the militia. So again, we don't exactly know what happened during those 6 months, but we know that the IDF turned from just having a blind eye to officially funding and working with the organization. On May 26th, which is the same day that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began operating its distribution centers in Gaza, so this is exactly the time when Israel made a move to take over and centralize the humanitarian aid distribution in the Gaza Strip, the Popular Forces deployed along the different aid truck routes that go through Rafah, securing them to their destination. Critically important compared to their previous activity and the nature of their street fighting, starting on May 26, members of the group were dressed in regulation security fatigues. They displayed their weaponry in public, i.e. in full view of the IDF, which in the Gaza Strip usually would lead to a gun battle if Palestinians are seen armed. At this point, clearly there was some agreement between the group and the IDF. And on their uniforms, they also had tags that said anti-terrorism service, and it said that in Arabic and in English. So once again, clearly this is part of a larger framework that is designed not only to display something to the Palestinian population, but also possibly to the IDF or to a larger international community. So, what do we know about the current aims and allegiances of this organization that is operating under the umbrella of the IDF in southern Gaza? On the one hand, there is no doubt that the militia is a rival of Hamas and is operating alongside Israel in its attempt to curtail Hamas's influence and activities in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. In a series of statements issued over the last 2 weeks, Yasser abu-Shabab denounced the Hamas-led government and stated that the aim of his group is to protect Palestinians from Hamas's government by providing food and protection to the population. Hamas, in turn, issued a series of statements and on June 6th denounced abu-Shabab's forces and stated that they are in complete collaboration with the IDF. I will say that to some extent this was confirmed on June 10th. On that day, the Popular Forces announced that they had attacked members of Hamas's Sahim unit, which is the unit in charge of killing suspected Palestinians who are suspected of collaboration with Israel. However, hours later, it was reported that this appears to have been a joint operation between the Popular Forces and the IDF. Israeli airstrikes were reported and missiles were fired at the Hamas units while the Popular Forces were attacking those units as well. So whether the IDF saw the Popular Forces were carrying out this attack and facilitated them, or if this was planned and coordinated in advance, that we don't know. What we do know is there is active cooperation. On the other hand, despite the obvious cooperation with Israel, the group's leadership has declared that it is not working alongside the Israeli military, and added that it is operating in areas controlled by the IDF out of necessity and in order to stop Israel's plans of expelling Palestinians from their lands. Moreover, on June 3rd, Yasser abu-Shabab himself stated that he is operating under the quote-unquote legitimate Palestinian leadership. That is a phrase that indicates the Palestinian Authority. Abu-Shabab said that his organization is operating under the directives of the Palestinian Authority, Hamas's big rival in the West Bank, and is receiving instructions from that leadership. The Palestinian Authority later denied any official connection to the group, and Abu-Shabab also retracted part of his statement several days later, stating that there is no official connection with the Palestinian Authority, but there are consultations. Some reports have suggested that the Palestinian Authority is unofficially supporting the group as a counterweight to Hamas, however that at this time neither the Palestinian Authority nor Abu-Shabab have an interest in being officially politically aligned with each other. Beyond the official ties, either with Israel or with the Palestinian Authority, some reports have suggested that the group is also affiliated with the Islamic State, with ISIS. Regarding this possible connection to ISIS, I will say that at this point there does not appear to be any substantiated connection between the popular forces and ISIS-affiliated groups. At the same time, however, there are reports that suggest that some of the group's members have been previously part of more Salafi-style groups that are ISIS-affiliated in the Gaza Strip. So again, the members of the group that are being armed by Israel were in the past possibly affiliated with more ISIS-affiliated groups. More importantly, one of the group's prominent figures, Issam Nabahin, had previously fought alongside ISIS in Sinai, and he had fought against the Egyptian army. He had also been previously involved in firing rockets at Israel, and he was arrested by Hamas prior to the war and sentenced to death for his ISIS connections. However, he had managed to escape during the first day of the war. So, again, at this point it appears that the group itself is not operating with any connection to ISIS. However, it is very likely that some members of the group have in fact in the past been either affiliated with ISIS-related groups or been part of ISIS themselves and are now part of the Popular Forces or the abu-Shabab militia. So regarding the militia's current aims, we don't know at this point if the abu-Shabab militia, whether it goes by the Popular Forces or the new anti-terrorism service, has over the last 6 months evolved and become a politically motivated group that is either affiliated with Israel or possibly affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, or if at this point it is simply a criminal gang that is seizing the opportunity and playing favors with all sides, but really just amassing its control in Rafah. What we do know is that the group has thus far been armed by the IDF and is being allowed to grow and enforce its control over different regions of the southern city of Rafah. Whether this turns into a new political force that ends up actually being part of some sort of day-after plan, if that ever comes, or if this just turns into another warlord-style gang, that remains to be seen. That is my highlight on the Palestinian militia that is being armed and funded by Israel in the Gaza Strip. If you find these highlights informative, please remember to send them on to anyone you think might be interested in updates on the war. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.